what it is.
Yeah.
You want to go to the pirate? We're going to this bit. Ooh, nice. Even better. All right, if I can get everybody together over this way. Okay, so this is the final destination on our tour. This is the Tremont House Hotel. Has anybody heard of this place by chance? You have?
A little bit.
Did you see that episode of Ghost Adventures?
I watched it with her.
Really? Yeah, that show Ghost Adventures has actually done an investigation here, as well as the Hotel Galveston over there on the seawall. This place has quite a bit of supernatural history attached to it. But before I get into that, quick history lesson real quick. This is not the original Tremont Hotel. The original Tremont Hotel burned down in the fire that happened 25 years before the 1900 storm. Once that happened, they decided, you know what, we're going to pump a lot of money into this. We're going to rebuild this place, and we're going to make it way bigger and way more extravagant than it was originally. And they spent years doing that, and they finally accomplished it, just so it can get destroyed again a couple years later during the 1900 storm. So then they rebuilt it again, and that's the one we have now. Fun fact though, if you go up to the rooftop bar, you'll see a very beautifully, intricately hand-carved wooden bar up there. That wooden bar did come out of the original Tremont building, which on a personal level is absolutely hilarious to me, because that means during one of the worst fires in U.S. history, and during the worst hurricane in U.S. history, there was always one person that was like, quick, save the bar. So on the count of somebody having their priorities straight, that thing is on the roof now. Now again, if I were to go over every ghost story, mysterious disappearance, unexplained death, dismemberment, whatever that has happened here in this building, we would be standing here for a week. So what I like to do is I whittle it down to my personal favorite story that has to do with the Tremont Hotel. Now, oddly enough, that story also has to do with a mansion over on 24th and Broadway called Ashton Villa. Has anybody been to or seen Ashton Villa? Okay, if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. It's actually the Galveston Island Welcome Center, so before 5 o'clock every day, pretty much anybody can walk into that place. Now, when Ashton Villa was first built, it was owned by a lady named Rebecca Brown, who also went by the name Betty Brown. Betty Brown was a member of the Browns family, which immediately made her one of the richest people on the island. And seeing as Galveston back then had the highest concentration of millionaires in the country, for her to be one of the richest one out of them says a lot. Now, she's probably one of my favorite people that have ever walked the island, because she was an absolute character. Locally, she was known as kind of a crazy lady, and she kind of ran with that. Like, she absolutely loved that reputation, to the point where she would go around introducing herself as either Mrs. Insane, Mrs. Eccentric, or the eccentric Betty Brown. Now, she would throw parties at Ashton Villa, and it didn't matter what walk of life somebody was from. They could have been filthy rich and sleeping on a mattress full of money, or like dirt poor and sleeping in the alleys. Everybody was invited to those parties. And when they showed up, she made sure that they knew everybody had to get along. And when she said that, they listened, because it was common knowledge that Betty Brown also had more mob connections than even she knew what to do with. So simultaneously, she was known as one of the nicest people on the island, one of the richest people on the island, as well as the last person on the island you ever want to mess with. Now, some guy named Thomas Sweeney figured this out the wrong way. He got in a relationship with Betty Brown's sister. They became married, had some kids. Eventually, Thomas Sweeney became a chronic alcoholic, and one day got way too physical with Betty Brown's sister, and Betty Brown found out about it. When she found out about it, she sent her mob goons after that guy. They grabbed him and drug him to the steps of Ashton Villa, in which case Betty Brown came out there and said, here's how we're going to handle this. As long as you leave Galveston Island and never come back, we're good. But if you don't leave, or you do come back, something god-awful is going to happen to you. Now, this guy, knowing what she's capable of, he immediately beelines it off of Galveston Island. But I guess he was a little foggy on the don't come back part. Because about 5 years later, he comes back to Galveston Island. He checks into the Tremont Hotel and he checks into room 301. And he never checks out of room 301. Now, nobody knows exactly what happened to this guy other than Betty Brown had him whacked. We know this because she bared absolutely no bones about it. You got to keep in mind, Thomas Sweeney wasn't exactly the kind of guy who could just disappear. Like, this was a really well-known guy in South Texas back then. So, of course, when he went missing, people went looking for him, which eventually led the cops to Ashton Villa, at which case they asked her, Ms. Brown, do you know what happened to Mr. Sweeney? Because we know this is your ex-brother-in-law, and there was a bit of a situation there, to where she probably responded with, oh yeah, I had that guy killed. And as soon as he said that, the cops tore up their paperwork, said, thank you, Ms. Brown, and they left, and nobody even looked for that guy again. That's how much pull Betty Brown had in Galveston, Texas. Now, as far as how he was murdered and what happened to him, nobody knows for certain. But the dominant rumor on the island at that time was that he was killed inside room 301, stuffed into a large suitcase, brought out the front, loaded onto a fishing vessel over there in the harbor, taken out to the Gulf of Mexico where he was fish bait for the weekend. If you look into Galveston's mob history, that pretty closely correlates with how the mob dealt with things back then. Because the mob was essentially Galveston's police. So, nobody knows for sure other than Betty Brown had that guy whacked and he is sleeping with fishes somewhere. Now that brings us to nowadays, and I do invite people to try this. Try calling the Tremont Hotel and reserving room 301. They will literally do everything in their power to stop you from reserving room 301. They will try to talk you out of it. Matter of fact, it was funny because one day I had somebody on my tour who so happened to be staying in that room and didn't know anything about it until we got here and I started telling this story. And the first thing out of their mouth was, so that's why they tried to talk us out of it. They will literally try to talk you out of staying in 301. It's because 301 and the entire third floor of this building is rumored to be extremely haunted. Still this day, the front desk will get calls from people staying on the third floor, usually in the vicinity of 301, saying, hey, y'all might want to get security or something up here because it sounds like there's a fight or like somebody's injured and might need medical attention. In which case, they always go up there and check it out and they find absolutely nothing. What they believe that to be is a residual ghost of Thomas Sweeney, still kind of getting the crap kicked out of him for being dumb enough to hit Betty Brown's sister. Now again, if I were to go over everything that has happened at this building, we would be standing here a week. So what I do like to do is recommend, if you want to know anything more about this building or anything else I've talked about on this tour tonight, there's a book you can get here in Galveston called Ghosts of Galveston. You can pretty much get that thing anywhere on the island. That has everything I've talked about on the tour in a lot more detail than I could get into within an hour. And like I said, an entire chapter on this place. It's incredibly interesting. That said, this is also where we conclude our tour. I would like to thank y'all very much for choosing us. Y'all been a great group tonight. Let's probably give y'all-self a round of applause here. Woo! I would certainly like to thank y'all for choosing us. I really love walking people around here, telling everybody the sordid history of this island. Keep in mind, everything I've talked about tonight is pretty much limited to the Strand. There's a lot of history on Galveston Island. There's also a lot of other tours I do recommend checking out, especially the cemetery tours. Our cemetery is the only cemetery in Galveston. I'll wait for this guy. And so he drives off. The Broadway cemeteries in Galveston are literally the only cemetery in Galveston where you can find a murderer buried with their victims. So I do recommend checking that out. As well, if y'all found the tour entertaining and want to give us a good review on Groupon, that would be absolutely amazing. Likewise, I do work for tips because as magical as Galveston Island is, we ain't figured out a way to make beer pay for itself yet. So anything in that regard will be accepted, no pressure. As well, before I leave, if anybody has any questions, even if that question is how do you get back to where y'all met up with me, I will be happy to answer that. So outside of that, thank y'all very much for choosing Galveston Zombie Tours. Y'all been a great group. Thank you.
Thank you.